He wrote it the morning after he went blind. Not the day of, the day after. The day of was different. The day of was the accident, the hospital, the doctors speaking in careful voices to his mother in the corridor while he lay in a bed trying to understand why the darkness wasn't lifting the way darkness was supposed to lift. That day he didn't write anything. That day he just listened. To the voices, to the machines, to the particular quality of a silence that had weight in it, the weight of something that was not coming back. But the morning after, when his mother had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, and the hospital had gone to that particular 3 a.m. quiet, Stevie Wonder, 8 years old, born Stevland Morris, 6 weeks away from the rest of his life, reached for the notebook his teacher had given him and he wrote a song. He wrote it in the dark. He had always written in the dark. The dark was not new. What was new was that the dark was now the only option. He never showed it to anyone, not his mother, not his teacher, not the producers who found him a year later and understood immediately that they were in the presence of something that didn't come along often, not in 60 years of making music that had reached into more people than he could count and found something true in every one of them. The song existed in one place, a notebook kept in a specific drawer, moved from house to house over 7 decades the way you move the things that are too important to leave behind and too private to display. Until Stephen Colbert asked about the morning after. The Late Show that Monday had the quality of reverence that fills a room when someone genuinely extraordinary walks in. Stevie Wonder at 73 moved through the studio with the particular ease of someone who has long ago made peace with his relationship to space, navigating not by sight, but by something harder to name. A lifetime of attention paid to everything that sight doesn't reach. He sat in the guest chair and the audience rose, and the applause was the kind that carries decades in it. Stephen was careful that night in the way you are careful with something irreplaceable. The conversation moved through the music, the early years, the classic albums, the songs that had become part of the permanent furniture of American life. Stevie was funny and sharp and generous with his stories, and the audience was completely his from the first moment. And then Stephen asked about the accident. "You've talked about losing your sight," Stephen said, "about what it meant for your life, your music, but I've always wondered about a specific moment. The morning after. What was the morning after like?" Stevie was quiet for a moment. "The morning after," he repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the phrase. "Yes," Stephen said, "not the day of, the day after when you woke up and it was still dark." Stevie turned his face slightly, the gesture he made when he was accessing something interior, something that required more than surface attention. "I wrote a song," he said. Stephen was very still. "The morning after," Stevie said, 3 in the morning, my mother was asleep in the chair, I reached for my notebook and I wrote a song." "What kind of song?" Stephen asked. Stevie smiled, the complicated smile of someone whose relationship with a memory spans 7 decades. "An honest one," he said, "the most honest one I ever wrote, which is probably why I never showed it to anyone." Subscribe and leave a comment, because what happened when Stephen asked to hear that song is the moment that stopped the entire Late Show studio. "You still have it?" Stephen asked. "I still have it," Stevie said. "Have you ever played it for anyone?" "No," Stevie said simply, "not once in 65 years." Stephen looked at him for a moment, then he reached under his desk. He produced a notebook, old, worn, the cover soft with age, the kind of notebook that has been handled so many times it has conformed to the hands that held it. He set it on the desk between them. Stevie turned his face toward the desk. He couldn't see the notebook, but something in the air changed when it arrived, a quality of attention, a shift in the room's temperature that had nothing to do with the HVAC system. "Your assistant brought it this afternoon," Stephen said quietly. "I asked if I could have it on the desk tonight. I didn't look inside it. I want you to know that nobody looked inside it." Stevie reached out. His hand found the notebook immediately, the practiced ease of someone who navigates by touch and has turned that navigation into its own kind of grace. He ran his fingers across the cover, across the edges of the pages, across 65 years of a secret kept in a drawer. "Why tonight?" Stevie asked. His voice was different, quieter. "Because you've given the world everything else," Stephen said. "Every song, every note, every piece of yourself that music can carry. And somewhere in that drawer there's the one thing you wrote before any of it. The thing you wrote when you were 8 years old on the morning after the worst day of your life." He paused. "I think that song belongs to more people than just you." The studio was completely silent. Stevie sat with the notebook in his hands for a long moment. His thumbs moved slowly across the cover back and forth, the way you touch something you have been touching for 65 years. Then he stood up. He carried the notebook to the piano that had been placed at his request at the side of the stage. He sat down. He set the notebook on the piano not to read from it, he couldn't read it, just to have it there, just to have it close. He placed his hands on the keys. This is the moment that nobody in the studio and nobody watching at home ever saw coming. He didn't play immediately. He sat with his hands on the keys and the notebook beside him and the particular silence of someone who is deciding not whether to do something but how to survive doing it. Then he began. The song was simple in the way that things written by 8-year-olds are simple, direct, unadorned, with none of the sophisticated architecture that 60 years of mastery would later build. A single melody, unhurried, moving through 4 chords that any beginner could play. But the simplicity was not a limitation. The simplicity was the point. This was a song written before the craft arrived, before the production and the arrangements and the decades of understanding how music works. This was just a child in a hospital bed at 3 in the morning reaching for the only thing that had ever made sense to him and using it to say the thing that had no other way to be said. Stevie began to sing. The words were a child's words, unpolished, sometimes grammatically uncertain. With the particular directness of someone who has not yet learned to protect themselves through language, they were about darkness, not as metaphor as fact. The specific physical fact of darkness that doesn't lift, the way it felt different from sleep darkness, the way it had its own texture, its own sound, its own relationship to time. And then the chorus arrived. The chorus was 4 lines. Simple 4 lines that an 8-year-old had written alone at 3 in the morning in a hospital in Michigan in 1960, that had never been heard by another human being in 65 years, that now filled the Ed Sullivan Theater and went out across whatever broadcast reached. He sang about what was still there, about what the dark couldn't take, about sound, the sound of his mother breathing in the chair beside him, the sound of the machines, the sound of his own voice when he hummed to himself to confirm that something still worked, about how you find out what you're made of not when the light is on but when it goes out and you discover what remains. When he reached the final line, 4 words, written by a child who was about to become one of the greatest musicians who ever lived, his voice broke. Not dramatically, just at one word, one specific word that carried 65 years of everything that had happened since that morning. He finished the song. The studio was absolutely silent. Stevie Wonder sat at the piano with his hands still on the keys and his head slightly bowed, and the worn notebook beside him, and did not try to compose himself and did not try to manage what was on his face, and the cameras saw all of it and nobody in the control room made a single sound. Steven stood up, he walked to the piano. He stopped beside Stevie and he put his hand on Stevie's shoulder and he didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would improve the silence. After a long time, Stevie raised his head. I was 8 years old, he said. His voice was rough and clear at the same time. I was 8 years old and I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know about the music or the albums or any of it. I just knew that the dark was real and I needed to put it somewhere. He touched the notebook. I put it here. And then you put it in every song after, Steven said quietly. Stevie was quiet for a moment. And then I put it in every song after, he said. The audience rose. The notebook went back to the drawer. The song was never officially released. Stevie said some things were complete exactly as they were, and this one was complete. It had been written for a specific moment, and that moment had finally arrived, and now it was finished. But the people who were in that studio on that Monday night carried it with them. The specific melody, the child's words, the 4 lines of the chorus. They carried it the way you carry things that reach somewhere ordinary language doesn't reach. Some songs are written before the songwriter knows they are a songwriter. Some songs are written in the dark, alone, at 3 in the morning, by someone who is 8 years old and has just discovered what they are made of. Those are the truest songs, the ones written before the craft arrives, the ones written when the only tool available is honesty. Stevie Wonder had given the world 65 years of extraordinary music. But on a Monday night in November in the Ed Sullivan Theater, he gave them something older than all of it. The first song, the honest one. The one written in the dark on the morning after when he reached for his notebook and discovered that the music was still there. It was always still there. If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe, because some songs are written before the songwriter knows what they are. And some take 65 years to find their audience.